Hello everyone, I finally managed to create a new video for the channel, and this time we are going to talk about drums. I've set up 4 Model Ds as drums, so we have a kick, a snare, a close and open hi-hat. I've used the Behringer RD-8 to drive the drums, so I'm using the sequencer from the RD-8 to push out notes that the Model D will play as drums. Also, the RD-8 is synced to Ableton Live, and so as soon as I hit play on Ableton Live, everything should actually start playing. It's a little complicated setup, that's because the RD-8 works within the same MIDI channel, while when you use 4 synthesizers, of course, you will have to use 4 different MIDI channels. I found a way to overcome that issue. If you want to know more about that, I've included the explanation at the end of the video. This is the basic setup, and the bass drum and snare are synced to the same sounds on the Model Ds, but low tom and mid tom are actually close and hi-hat on the Model Ds. So let's jump into the sound straight away, and I'm gonna just create a 4x4 beat, which I actually pre-created, and then I will have to hit play on Ableton so that you see the sequencer has been triggered. There's not much else we need to do here. As you can see, if I add any sound, this is going to reflect into the sequence, and clearly this is not the RD-8 sound, but it's actually this sound here. Okay, so what we've got here is the kick drum on the first Model D, and I made it by connecting the filter contour to the oscillator 1, and then I've used only one square oscillator and mapped to 32 range, and nothing else. As you can see, everything is down and there's not any other sound. This is where the magic happens actually. All this section right here will edit the sound of the kick. Let's try a few things. So if I want to make some sort of gabber or heavy techno kick, I can just increase the level of the cutoff frequency. If I actually want to make it a bit more like housey, here we are, like kind of like the 909, I can just play with the filter and decay, and here we are. We have now a basic kick, which is just simple, and obviously any change we make would change the sound significantly, even just a little bit. And if I change the attack of the filter, this is rather interesting. I'm just increasing the tail, so the decay. Here we go. Well, that's pretty much it for the kick. Yeah, sounds good. I can make it a bit a bit less taily, if that's a word. So I would just reduce the decay to make it a bit more realistic, at least for my taste. I guess that we can now move to the second part, which is this one right here, and it's the snare. The snare is pretty much based on pink noise. I've just amplified that sound a little bit with the amplifier right here, and that's pretty much it actually. there's nothing else. Everything else is actually done by the filter and the loudness contour, so there's not much else to say. I'm gonna go back to the RD-8 now, and I'll try to add a snare sound, and this is how that sounds like. Going back to synth, also this one can be changed. That's it. I don't want to modify this one too much, but again, the way to modify this one is just playing with the filter and with the attack decay system. Sounds cool. Oh, I can just put it back and increase decay. Cool. We can now move to the hi-hat and close-hat, which are very similar to the snare. On the hi-hat and close-hat, instead of using pink noise, I'm using white noise on both of them. This is the hi-hat and this is the close-hat. So the setup is very similar. So let's add the close-hat and hi-hat to the composition. Let's do something a bit more interesting. Okay, let's leave it like this for now, and then I'm gonna add also the open hat. Let's go back to the close hat for now, and I'm gonna try to modify the sound of the close hat. I'm gonna deactivate the open hat for now because I don't want to get confused. See how this is set up, I'm gonna just pan through the entire synth. There we go. I hope this is clear enough for you to see how I did that, and I'm gonna do the same on the snare. There you go. Do the same also on the kick drum. Well, this kind of setup is actually quite good because you can replicate the Model D with any other soft synth if you do not have a Model D. So you can use the Arturia clone of the Model D and so on. So you don't actually need to have 4 Model Ds to do this. You can use any other synthesizers. So just replace the output with something else. But we will look into that at the end of the video. And now we can activate the open hat. I'll keep it pretty close. As you can see, just a little move will make the difference. And this is how this is set up. I'm gonna just span through sound as drums. Obviously this is just one way to hear them, because you can obviously customize them as much as you want to get the sound that you want out of them, and it's pretty cool. And also the fact that you can easily change the composition from the RD-8 is pretty cool too, because it's very quick. As you can see, this is pretty easy to do, and you don't have to use Ableton Live to do all of this. It's just happening from the RD-8, which is pretty comfy. Here we go. So I'll try to play around with the sound a little bit more. Let's briefly talk about how I set this up. I've tried to do this video multiple times and it always sounds super complex. So let's try to make it as simple as possible. So we've got the RD-8, which is synced to Ableton Live. Let me show you quickly. And as you can see, we are sending out the notes, and we are also getting back the track notes. So what that means is that I press play here, then the RD-8 would start, and all the notes that the RD-8 is internally playing will be pushed out through the MIDI output. And then, as you can see, I'm getting that MIDI composition back into those tracks. The challenge with that is that, say that I do record that composition from the RD-8 sequencer, and I would get something similar to this. It's not exactly like that, but say that it's something similar to this, in which we have the kick drum on C, and then the snare on D, and then the hat on F. So each of these notes would correspond to a different drum sound, which is pretty much like a drum machine works. Normally this is the setup, so if you get a MIDI out from a drum machine, you will get something similar to this. Obviously it can be more complicated or even easier according to how complex you want to make it on the drum machine. The problem with this setup is that this is not really how 4 monophonic synthesizers would need to receive those notes, because in a monophonic synthesizer situation, it's one synthesizer for each voice, while here on the drum machine you have one drum machine for all the voices. So what I needed to do basically is just split those notes into different MIDI channels, and but the problem is that all I get from the RD-8 is not those notes split into MIDI channels. I get just all of those notes together in one single MIDI channel. And that's a bit of a challenge. So what I did is basically creating a MIDI track for each of the sounds I want the RD-8 to trigger. And when I talk about the sound, I mean like Model D sounds. And I still get a composition like this because I'm getting the output from the RD-8. But what I'm doing is basically filtering out for each of the track all the notes which I want to ignore. So if I hit play, I still get all of these for each of the MIDI tracks to which I plugged the RD-8 to. But say for the kick, I've used Scales, which is a MIDI plugin included in Ableton Live, to exclude the notes which I don't want. So for if I get the MIDI output from the RD-8 into the kick of the Model D, which requires only those two, I set the scale to receive only C and exclude those notes. Let me show you. Here we go. You see? The scale is programmed to get only C and nothing else. So there's no way the RD-8, which is coming into this track and is playing something like this, there's no way for it to play all these notes. The only notes which I'm actually getting on this track is C. All the other ones will be ignored. And obviously, we can pretty much do the same on the snare. I could just use scale to say, okay, don't play C and don't play F, just play D. Okay, so it's like ignoring those two and reading just this from the output of the RD-8. I did that for all of the sounds which I've got set on the Model D. And then in each of the track, as you can see, so I'm filtering just C from the output of the RD-8, okay? And then I'm pushing that note into channel 1 of Model D. Then I did exactly the same thing. You see, I'm getting E from the RD-8 because E corresponds to the snare on the RD-8, and it will ignore any other notes of that MIDI output and push it into the Model D channel 2, which is the snare on my Model D stack. And I did pretty much the same thing on the other ones. It sounds a bit complicated, and it is maybe a bit complicated, but this is the best way I could come up with. There might be better ways to do this, but this is a kind of cheap or possibly free, if you already have Ableton Live, to do this. It's not perfect, but it doesn't matter because I just wanted to use the sequencer of the RD-8 to drive those synthesizers and to, you know, have MIDI sequences on the fly rather than creating MIDI tracks in Ableton Live all the time. And kind of worked, and we got to the end of the video finally. It was a lengthy one, I understand that, but this kind of tutorial demo-ish content requires some time to obviously watch it, of course, and also make it. Plus, I have to say that this lockdown situation in the UK didn't help a lot. I don't know about you guys, but I can't really focus properly on things. But as you can see, I managed to come up with something. The next episode will be about those 4 Model Ds that go through the DSP of an access virus. At least that's the main idea, but it might change. For now, that's what I'm expecting to do for the next one. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel because we are still growing. This is the second episode, but there will be many to come. Thank you very much and see you next.